Hello, Year 9. Today I'm going to do the test review. So you can either just look at the mark scheme or you can watch me go through it all on here. I think this will help you more, but I know some people just want to look at the mark scheme and copy the mark scheme out. Let me get rid of my emails so it doesn't keep pinging. Right. Question 1. Diagram below shows a cell, and we're doing this in green pen, so I'll use green too. The nucleus of a cell, genes are part of chromosomes. So it's that first box there. Different genes control different characteristics of an organism, and studying the similarities and differences between organisms allows us to classify them. That is not something that you have learned yet, because we learn that later on in ecology, which is something you learn in year 11. But the whole point of this is that we can classify organisms so we know where they come from, and then eventually when you look at their DNA you can see actually how they're related to each other. So that's why we know that certain types of ape are 99.8% the same DNA as us, because we've looked at this, classified them, and then we've looked at their DNA and we found that out. Okay, 2 cells are animals, 2 cells are plants. Which ones are which? Now let's have a look. Now I know if I've got a plant cell, there are 3 things that plant cells have that animal cells do not. One is a chloroplast. Okay, one is a cell wall. And then the other one is a vacuole. So let's have a look. I should know that's a sperm cell and that's an animal cell, but I can't see any of those 3 there. The same here. Now if I look at this one, a root hair cell, I should know a root hair cell is a plant cell, but I can see there's my vacuole and there's my cell wall. Now the same for this one here. Here's my vacuole, there's my cell wall, and there's my chloroplast. So I know that C and D are both plant cells. Okay, and how do I know so actually, well, what do they both have? I can't write, how do I know? You could write D has a chloroplast and C has a vacuole and a cell wall, but I would just say pick one. So I'm going to say both have a vacuole, and that is something that only plants have. Okay, let's go to B. Which one, A, B, C, or D, is adapted for swimming? Well, if you look, this has got a long tail, so this is the only one that needs to swim. So that is A. And then which one, A, B, C, or D, can produce glucose by photosynthesis? Now, I'll scroll back up again, and you see here, this one is the only one that's got chloroplasts in, so D is the only one that can do photosynthesis. Okay. D. Cells A, B, C, and D all use oxygen. For what process do cells use oxygen? That is respiration. Remember, you have glucose plus oxygen makes carbon dioxide plus water, and the important bit, plus energy. We call that the actual adenotriphosphate, or ATP. You learn that in A level. Or if you do triple, Mr. Kwok will probably tell you about that anyway when you do triple biology. Okay, the diagram shows a cell. These little dots are oxygen molecules, and it says, what are the structures labelled A and B? Well, we should know that A is the nucleus, so this is the nucleus. And B, that is the cell membrane. If you don't know the structure of an animal and a plant cell, that is probably the most important thing to learn, because it always comes up. How could you tell the diagram is an animal cell and not a plant cell? Okay, give 2 reasons. So actually, let's just look up here, and I'm going to give 2 reasons for this question here, and I'm just going to put them up there. 1, how can you tell it's an animal cell, not a plant cell? Well, we talked about before, what do plant cells have that animals do not? This cell does not have a cell wall. So I'm going to say cell wall. And 2, it does not have a vacuole. You could also say it does not have a chloroplasts. That would be the third reason, but we don't need all 3, we need 2. So, right, let's go down a little bit. B, oxygen will diffuse into the cell in the diagram. Why? I'm just going to re-plug my mouse in so I don't have to keep clicking and it jumps around all the time. Why is that the case? Well, if I scroll up, you can see there are many more oxygen molecules on the outside. So if I did a little box there, and I tried to make the same size box here, how many have I got? I've got 1, 2 inside this box, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5, so let's just say 6. Let's say I've got 6. Either way, I've got more. Now the reason why I've done a box of about the same size is because that is to do with the concentration. Well, 6 means that there's a high concentration outside and there is a low concentration inside, because you just compare these two directly. Now, oxygen will diffuse into the diagram. Why is that the case? Well, you need to say because there is a higher concentration of oxygen outside the cell. And that is all you need to say because they've told you that diffusion will happen. Now, part C. The cell shown in the diagram is usually found with similar cells. Draw a ring around the correct answer to complete the sentence. Scientists call a group of similar cells a tissue. Let me just get rid of that. Don't want that popping up all the time either. Question 4. Figure 5 shows a human cheek cell viewed under a light microscope. Sorry, figure 5, I said that. Which one is the nucleus? Well, we should get this one, right? Nucleus is B. We should know that C is the cytoplasm and A is the cell membrane. What is the function of the nucleus? It controls the activities of the cell. Again, we should know this is the cytoplasm. We should know these are the mitochondria. Okay, and we might know that these are the ribosomes. So just for a bit of extra knowledge for you there, we need to be able to have drawing the cells, labeling the cells, and what are the functions of the parts of the cell down to a T, because that is just the basic knowledge that gets you most of the marks for this topic. Okay, cheek cells are a type of body cell. Body cells grow through cell division. What is the name of this type of cell division? Well, cheek cells need to make more cheek cells, and they have to be identical, right? So this is mitosis, and you've got to be very careful with the spelling. If there is an E anywhere in your mitosis, so if you wrote miteosis, you do not get the mark because that looks too similar to this. This is meiosis, which is for sex cells only. That is not correct, but if you've done some sort of hybrid of both of them, the examiner assumes you don't know what the answer is and gives you the wrong one. So if it looks like mitosis, you're good. If there's an E in it anywhere, you don't get the mark. Right. Ribosomes and mitochondria are not shown. What type of microscope do you need? You need an electron microscope. You could call it a scanning electron microscope. You can call it a transmission electron microscope, but really just say it's an electron microscope. If you just wrote electron, you get a mark because it's implied you are talking about a type of microscope. But be careful about that. If they said, what would you need to see the ribosomes and mitochondria, you would have to say it's an electron microscope. Give one advantage. Well, the resolution is much greater than a light microscope. when we're talking about resolution, you know we're talking about screens, right? And let's say on a really bad resolution, my cell might look like this. On a good resolution, my cell might look like this, but I also might be able to see other things in it as well. The whole point of a resolution is, the definition of resolution is what is the smallest distance that two things can be next to each other and you can distinguish between them. That is a resolution. So if you were to look very closely to your screen and you can see the pixels, the smallest distance that two things can be together, two things can be apart and be distinguished between is probably just over a pixel or two. Because it would have to be one pixel would have to be A, there would have to be a white pixel in the middle, and then the second pixel would be B. And then if they were any closer than that, you would not be able to distinguish between two different points because they would be displayed as the same. That is what a resolution is. Give one advantage, well, you've got a higher resolution, say that you can actually, using an electron microscope, you can make 3D images, which is really quite cool. Or you can just say that it produces detailed images, it's got a much higher magnification, and it's got a much higher resolution. Basically, electron microscopes are a lot better, they're just a lot more expensive, that's why they're not used very much. Okay. The cheek cell in figure 6 is magnified 250 times. Well, actually, down here I'm going to write magnification equals 250 times, just because that's important information. The width of the width of the cell is shown by the line D to E. Now, because you're doing this at home, normally you'd have this printed out, and you would have to get a ruler out and do this. I have given you the answer in centimeters. Well, that's not quite correct. The whole point is that you need to convert it to millimeters. We should know that there are 10 millimeters equals 1 centimeter. So there are 47.5 millimeters in 4.75 centimeters. So there's your first mark. And unfortunately, on the mark scheme, when you look at it, it gives you an error margin. Because I've given you the answer, there is no error margin. I'm going to get my calculator ready because I'm going to have to do this calculation. Now, it says use the equation to work out the width of the cell. So let's say you got this mark. This is one mark here. Now I'm going to write, so my image size, that is what I just measured. My image is this up here. This is my image. That's my image. Okay. Well, the image size was 4.75 centimeters or 47.5 millimeters. My magnification, which we were told in the question, was 250. So let me have a look. 47.5 divided by 250 equals 0.19. Now, this is where you have to look at your answer. If you got something wrong here, if you got this answer wrong, but let's say your answer was, you just put in 4.75. If you got this wrong, but down here you wrote 4.75 over 250, which gives you an answer of, I'll divide that by 10, which gives you an answer of 0.019. You get this mark, but you lose that mark. It's called error carried forward. So this was wrong, but you used your answer correctly next. So this is an ECF. Now, to convert millimeters to micrometers. The whole reason that we do this in millimeters is because it makes the conversion to micrometers very easy. There are 1,000 micrometers in 1 millimeter. So if I've got to get from millimeters to micrometers, what do I have to do? I have to times by 1,000. So my answer times 1,000 should be 190 micrometers. They've given you the unit there, but it printed weird, so I'd write it again there. So that is your answer. This cell is 190 micrometers in length. Now this is the 3 mark. You get 1 mark. This is 1 mark. This is 1 mark. And this is 1 mark. So that's how you mark that one. Okay, let's go down. Question 5. The diagram shows cells A, B, C, and D. Which cell can photosynthesize? Well, you're looking for chloroplasts, aren't you? So it has to be B. Which cell is adapted for receiving and sending information? Well, it's the long one that branches out into lots of different areas. So that is D. Which cell is adapted to respire quickly? Remember, aerobic respiration happens in the mitochondria. So the cell that has got lots of mitochondrion, that respires very quickly, and that should be A. If you were to look at muscle cells, you will see that they have loads of mitochondrion. Question 6. Now, this, they don't write this at the start of the questions anymore, but what they do check when they look at a mark scheme, so I'm actually going to show you the mark scheme here. Right, let's have a look. View 1 page. All the way down. Here we are. Now, they don't mark you down on spelling or punctuation or anything like that, but they do mark you on your ordering of an answer. So if you look here, we have to, as an examiner or as someone that marks your tests, I have to band your answers. And what I mean is your answer 0 marks? Is it a level 1 answer? Is it a level 2 answer? Or is it a level 3 answer? So that is before I even put a tick on a page, really. What I would do is I'd tick any marking points that you do, and then I would decide what band you're in. Then I would decide how many marks you got. And if you look, this is why 6 markers are difficult to mark, but it is going to be good for you to have a look at your answer and see if you've come up with the same mark as I did. For a level 1 answer, you would need to give an example of a named substance or a named process or a definition for diffusion or why it's important. So you're hitting one important point in this question. So if you said oxygen is a substance that is needed for diffusion in animals, you'd get a mark because it's a level 1 answer. If you went into more detail, you might get 2. Now, if you gave one example of a substance and correctly linked it to a process in either animals or plants, so again, talking about oxygen, saying that oxygen is used for respiration in animals, and then maybe talked about, so that would be maybe a 3 mark, but if you talked about, say, carbon dioxide as well, or you talked about oxygen and how it is used in plants, it might make it a 4 mark answer. If you talked about a process, say photosynthesis or respiration, and linked it to the substance and did it for the other type of plant, the other type of organism, so let's say you talked about oxygen and carbon dioxide in respiration in animals, and then you talked about oxygen and carbon dioxide in photosynthesis in plants, that is a 5 to 6 mark answer. And then what they've done is they've put the points. These are the points that are good points, so they're marking points. So what is the importance of diffusion? What are the substances? Okay, each one of these is a marking point, but how you link these marking points together is how you get the marks. So now that I've done that, let's get rid of this. Come on, get rid of it. There we are. Now, let's go for a 6 mark answer then. So it says, draw. Diffusion is an important process in animals and plants. The movement of many substances into and out of cells occurs by diffusion. Describe why diffusion is important to animals and plants. in your answer you should refer to 1, 2, and 3. So, let's see. To start off with, let me demonstrate to the examiner that I know what diffusion is. So my first point is going to be diffusion is the movement of particles from a high concentration, conc with a full stop is just the shorthand abbreviation of concentration, to a low concentration. Okay, so I've told the examiner I know what diffusion is. That will get me a mark at the very least. Now let's have a look. Because it's the first on the list, let's look at animals. And for animals, I will write in red. And then in plants, I'll write in green. So, let's see. Animals. Now, what I would do, this is me, just, you're looking into my brain right now. I'm doing it in bullet points, I'm doing it in sections. So I'm writing animal, because this is what I'm going to talk about. So what do animals use diffusion for? Well, the biggest process in an animal that we stay alive by is respiration. Now, what is respiration? I'm actually gonna write the equation because I remember what it is. Well, we use glucose and we use plus oxygen. And that makes carbon dioxide, and that makes water, and it makes energy. Now let's have a look. Out of those substances, which ones are going to diffuse? Well, it's going to be the oxygen will diffuse because that's a gas, and it will be the carbon dioxide that diffuses, again because it's a gas. Sorry, I've just used green on red, which is probably very difficult to look at. Water, that is osmosis, because remember, water is osmosis. Energy is, we don't look at energy until A level, really. Glucose, that will not diffuse, that is actively transported, again, which you don't know about yet. So, the key thing to look for is this is a gas, right? Water's not a gas, glucose is not a gas. Only the gases diffuse. So, now I need to talk about, so I've given me I know what respiration is. I've shown what the process is, which actually this gets me up into the level 2 marks because I've given the full equation, I've given both of the substances, and I've given the process. So literally just writing a bullet point saying diffusion is this, and respiration is that. That's already 3 marks. Let's add to this. Let's get my marks. Let's pump those numbers up. Well, I need to say that oxygen has to diffuse into the cell for respiration. I'm not going to write the whole word because it's going to be ages. And I need to say that carbon dioxide is a waste product. And then I'm going to write it diffuses out of cell. Right, let's talk about plants now. Plant. Well, plants do both, actually. Plants do respiration and photosynthesis. But I've already talked about respiration. So in the aspect of not writing all day, I'm going to just talk about photosynthesis. Well, what is photosynthesis? Well, it's the opposite of respiration, and that is when I have literally the opposite thing happen. Carbon dioxide plus water makes glucose plus oxygen. Remember, plants use photosynthesis. Plants use photosynthesis to make their own food. That's why it's called synthesis, because it's making something, and photo is because they use light to do this. So that here is light. So instead of making energy, it takes in energy from the sun. Well, we know that carbon dioxide and oxygen are the things that diffuse. Well, what happens? You could just probably write that it will be the opposite in plants because it's flipped over. It's probably not clear enough. It's a bit lazy, so I'm going to start with oxygen diffuses out of the plant cell. And then put brackets waste product. Then I'm going to say that carbon dioxide, I'm just going to write shorthand because I'm running out of space, diffuses into cell for photosynthesis. I know what you're probably thinking is, well, actually, I've literally just written that here, but in the examiner's eyes, all I've done is remember this equation. I might not actually understand what this means. So just writing these two little bullet points here tells the examiner you actually do understand what's going on. And it's a bit more application. So that's it. This is a level 6. If you just wrote this bullet point here, this bullet point here, and this bullet point here, because this is quite an easy question, you'll probably get 4 or 5 marks. I'd have to ask a specialist exactly because it's quite a boundary case. But adding any of these little points, pump it up a bit more and make your answer stronger, so the examiner is more likely to give you more marks. Okay, let's move on, and I'm going to scroll it. Question 7. A cook prepares a fresh fruit salad by cutting up a variety of fruits, placing them into a bowl. After 2 hours, the fruit is surrounded by syrup. So let's have a look at my fruit piece. Here's my fruit piece. It's a piece of moist fruit. They put sugar on the outside. Actually, I'm going to make my fruit piece a little bit bigger. I'm going to do it in green because it's a plant. So let's just look at one cell. There's a cell on my fruit. There's a cell wall. There's a cell membrane. Here's the vacuole. Nucleus. I'm not going to do any more. But inside this plant cell, there is lots of water. And actually, inside this vacuole, there's loads of water. It's the cell sap plus water. Really high concentration of water forces all the water into the cell. Lots of water in this plant cell, or this fruit. Now, outside of the fruit, there is lots of sugar. Lots of sugar. So lots of sugar here. Not very much water. So what happens is, because the fruit is moist, as in it's slightly damp, some of the sugar is going to dissolve on the surface of this fruit. Now, if we look at the water concentration only, inside this plant you've got a high water concentration, and outside this plant you've got a low water concentration. So what is the water going to do? The water is going to move across the cell membrane out of the plant cell or the fruit, and it is going to create a syrup. So that water will move out of the plants, and if you look very closely at the diagram, you'll see that these little fruits are slightly more shriveled. So what's going on? Well, we need to talk about, if you don't mention osmosis, you do not get full marks. So let's start off. I'll go back to green. Well, the first mark, you'd say the sugar, it dissolves on the surface of the moist fruit, okay, because remember this fruit is slightly damp on the surface, so some of the sugar dissolves on the surface of the fruit. That's the first step. Now, you can either say, because in the mark scheme it says the solution is more concentrated than the solution inside the fruit, that is talking about the solute concentrations. That is talking about the concentration of sugars. there's a higher concentration of sugars on the outside than the inside, so the water tries to equalize that. I prefer to talk about the water concentration, so I'm going to say there is a lower water concentration on the outside compared to the inside. That's 2 marks. So each bullet point is a mark. Now the mark 3, which is the most important one, which you could mention at any point, you needed to say osmosis. If I can spell correctly. You were allowed diffusion, but you had to specifically mention the partially permeable membrane. So osmosis is the diffusion of water. That's 1 mark. Osmosis is, this is like half a sentence. The sentence, it gets cut here because the second mark is for saying through a partially permeable membrane. So be careful about this definition, because water can diffuse. If I got a glass of just juice, so in my glass I just had just juice, as in Ribena or Robinson's or whatever, and then I put in a blob of water, that water will diffuse and eventually it will spread out. Now osmosis is when water has to move through that didn't work. I will do a dotted line. When your water has to move through a partially permeable membrane. So here's my water, and it has to go through something like a cell membrane. Okay, that is called osmosis. And we will go down a little bit, scroll. Question 8. The diagram shows what happens to the shape of a plant cell when it is placed in distilled water. Explain why the cell swells and becomes turgid. Name the process involved. Well, why does the cell swell? Because water enters the cell. So water enters the cell. And what process is that? That is osmosis. So we've got 1 mark for that, 1 mark for that. So if you just said osmosis, you get a mark. Give 1 feature of the cell wall that allows it to be to become turgid. Well, pardon me. You have to say that it's strong. It's the easiest way. A cell wall is strong. They're made out of strong things. Instead of bones, because we have bones to stay upright, plants have to have a cell wall. So I'm going to say the cell wall is strong. You could also say it's elastic, it has to stretch a little bit, but I think the easiest one is it is strong. You'll learn a bit more about it later. Now B, which is completely different from the above one, they've just sort of tried to, this question has tried to lead you into the correct area of your brain. You need to talk about osmosis and concentrations. But for part B it says, describe the change that will occur if a piece of peeled potato is placed in a concentrated sugar solution, and explain why this change occurs. Well, this is exactly the same as what we talked about the fruit in the previous question. We haven't done this experiment, unfortunately, but what you'd have is you'd have your test tube with some concentrated sugar solution in it. So there would be you'd dissolve a lot of sugar in this water, and then your potato would go in like this, and you come back to it a bit later. Usually you'd leave it overnight, and your potato would shrivel up and shrink down a little bit, and you'd measure how the concentration of the solution affected the size change in the potato. Now this is a very concentrated sugar solution, so that means there is lots of sugar compared to the inside. Again, I prefer to talk about the water concentration. Well, actually the water concentration is high in here, and low out here. So the same thing happens. First of all, what happens to the potato? Well, the potato shrinks. Okay, so it says describe the change that will happen and then say why. So the change that happens to the potato gets smaller. Okay, why? Because the water concentration is greater inside the potato than outside of the potato. So water leaves the cell via osmosis. So let's say water conc is, you actually get 1 mark for saying water concentration or sugar concentration is greater inside potato. Really, you should say inside the potato cell. So the water moves out of the cell, so via osmosis. I'm not going to say osmosis because we've already said it like 20 million times already. So the water moves out of cell. I feel like this question should have been a 4 mark because there were 4 points to make that were really important. But as long as you made 3 out of 4 of these points, you got the marks. And that is the end of the test review. So please green pen your test and send it to me, or take a photo to show you've done it. Really, I've already marked them, so I don't need to see it again. If I haven't already marked your test, then you should send it through anyway. But that is everything done.